Hello everyone! In this video I'm going to be reviewing Renaissance theater as well as going over some of the homework assignments that we have in Google Classroom. So Renaissance theater, the Renaissance was from the 15th to the 17th century, and we're looking at England and how it was in England. I have this beautiful picture here of Queen Elizabeth, and Queen Elizabeth loved theater very much, and she liked to see plays all of the time. So theater became very popular during this time period and more for entertainment than it was for religion, like during the medieval theater time. So acting became sort of respected during this time period. It was it became a job that you could do and actually make money doing, but it also wasn't something that you would want your child to do. So it wasn't a great job, but it did become a job to do. And so because more people were starting to go see plays because Queen Elizabeth really liked them, they decided, well, let's build a place to perform, because before they were kind of traveling troops going around, or the theater was used for religious purposes, but now they decided, let's build an actual theater and we will perform plays there at the same place over and over again. So here I have this sketch of the very first theater that was ever built. It was built in 1576, right outside of London, and it was actually called the Theater. So this is a picture of it here, and I have this animated version of what it would look like on the inside here. So the way that they actually, this is just an interesting something, they designed the theater to look something like what bear baiting games kind of looked like. So there was this thing that happened in England at the time where they would have a bear like here, and then they would let in wild dogs and they would fight the bears. And so people would watch this happen. And so when they built this theater, they said, let's model the theater after the place where people went to go watch the bear baiting. So that's why I have bear baiting here. And if you remember, we have these terms from earlier in the quarter: orchestra, mezzanine, box, and balcony. And that's kind of how this is situated here. This number 1 that I have would be kind of like the orchestra, the floor section. Number 2 would be like the mezzanine. 3 would be like the balcony, and 4 would be like the box. The cheapest seats were down here in the orchestra, and they were all standing seats. The only places where you could sit would be if you bought tickets to be up in one of these places. So that's why the cheapest seats were down here. This is a picture of the Globe Theater today. It actually burned down and they rebuilt it like 30 years ago, I believe it was. So if you look at the way that this is designed, it is sort of inside. I said inside-ish because they do have a roof over some of the people. However, if you weren't able to afford one of the seats up here in the balcony or the mezzanine, then you were in this orchestra section. And as you can see, there is no roof here. So if it was pouring rain during the play, you would get rained on. So I have this question: what time of day were the plays? Well, the plays had to be during the day, not at nighttime, because there was no electricity. So as you can see, it was open here at the top so that they could get the sunlight coming in as lighting for the plays. So the plays are starting to transition to being inside here, but not completely inside. And then the plays usually happened during the day. What were these plays about? Well, if you remember, the medieval plays were all about the Catholic religion, but during the Renaissance time, the plays weren't so much about religion anymore. A lot of the plays were about history and about the history in England and the royalty and the things that they did and the wars that happened and all of the politics and all of that. But the plays also showed that the kings and the queens were actually just normal people like everyone else. This was kind of a way to humanize and make the royalty seem like real people. So when you'd watch this play, you would see that your king or your queen had normal problems, just like you, with love or with siblings and things like that. There was both tragedies and comedies that were performed. If you remember from our terms in the beginning, a tragedy is a really, really sad play. So like Romeo and Juliet is an example of a tragedy. And a comedy is a funny play, something that you would go and you would laugh at. If you see here, I've got this picture of these people at the Globe Theater. Okay, so I have this picture here. And if you look at the costumes that these people on the stage are wearing, other than the jester, they do look very similar to what everyone in the audience is wearing. So the costumes looked a lot like the clothes that people wore on an everyday basis. It's hard to see because this picture is a little grainy, but if you look at this woman, this character here, she looks like she's wearing a very nice dress, but actually during the Renaissance time, women were not allowed to be in plays because it wasn't seen as decent. So actually, they had little boys playing the parts of the women characters in plays. So there's never actually any women on stage during the Renaissance. This is probably a young boy dressed up as a woman in a play. If you look at the set, it looks like they just have like a tapestry or a sheet of some sort hung up here as just like a backdrop. It doesn't seem like they really have a big elaborate set. It's relatively simple. Perhaps they have like a few set pieces behind this sheet so that when they take the sheet down, you can see what's behind it and be surprised. But they may just be using this sheet as well as their backdrop. So the sets weren't very detailed for the most part, and the costumes were mostly just clothes that you would see people wearing on an everyday basis. William Shakespeare, he's probably the most famous playwright of all time, but he's definitely the most famous playwright of the Renaissance period. So I have here, he wrote 37 plays and over 100 poems. 37 plays is a lot to write, and they're all very, very famous and get read and performed still today, many, many years later. William Shakespeare is associated with the Globe Theater. This theater that we were looking at here, a lot of people think of it as Shakespeare's Globe Theater. And I have a fire emoji here because the Globe Theater actually burned down, like I said earlier, and was rebuilt in like the 1990s, I think it was. I hope you like this gif of William Shakespeare because it makes me giggle. So the big takeaways for the Renaissance period is that the plays were inside theaters that were mostly enclosed. Remember that they were open at the top here because they needed the light from the sun to light up the stage so that people knew what was going on. But they did have a roof over some of the people that were watching the play. When the Renaissance was from the 15th to the 17th century, and then I have during the day because the plays took place during the day. The purpose of theater during the Renaissance was for entertainment, unlike the medieval times where it was all about religion. Now, theater is starting to become much more about entertainment. And what were the plays about? They were about royalty and history and love and war. But one thing to note is that the plays were never about normal everyday people. They were always about royalty. So if we look at our class page here and the assignments that we have, there's one assignment here, Renaissance Theater. And what I want you to do for that is read this one-page article about the Renaissance time and then answer these, I think it's 9 questions. Yep, 9 questions about the reading, and it should go in order as you read. If you do need any help with these questions, please come to after school support. I am there on Mondays and Tuesdays. Some other assignments that we have is the slideshow timeline. So if we look at this PowerPoint, You're going to go to your Dramatic Lit student notebook, and then if you still have your history slides, you're going to do this there, but if you don't have a slide for history, just add a slide. So you're going to hit the plus sign up here when you're editing, and that will come down with this menu where you'll click on Table. And then when you click on Table, change it so it's 5 columns and 1 row, and then hit Insert Table. And that will give you something like this with these different boxes. So in this first box, you're going to put Ancient Greek Theater. So you're going to name the type of theater, and then you're going to also put the time period. So what century was this type of theater during? And then I also want you to list 2 to 3 characteristics. So I have some questions here that might help you come up with your characteristics. You could think about, what were the plays during this time period about? What were the costumes like? Were the plays outside or inside? You could also talk about the acting style or what the language was like. I just want you to list 2 to 3 things that make this type of theater significant or important or different from the other types. So in this first box, you're going to have Ancient Greek theater. And in the second box, you're going to have Medieval theater. And then in the third box, you're going to have Renaissance theater. So I posted a new slideshow today. And in this slideshow, I'm explaining how to add Renaissance theater to your timeline. So you should have Ancient Greek theater, and then what century it is, and then a couple of characteristics, and then Medieval theater, what century, and a couple characteristics. So now you're going to add to the third box Renaissance theater. And you're going to have what century it is and 2 to 3 characteristics. And I have questions here for you again. So then when you're done, your timeline should look something like this. These last 2 boxes, leave them open. We'll get to them next week. So the first one, Ancient Greek theater, what century is it? And then your 2 to 3 characteristics that you thought were important. And then the same thing for Medieval theater and the same thing for Renaissance theater. So for right now, these are our assignments from the last week or so that we have in the gradebook. And if you need help with any of them, please come to office hours or after school support.